Good morning.
Morning.
All right, it's a honor and privilege to be invited to speak with everyone this morning. I'd like to thank Dr. Page for the invitation. Thank you, Tanya, for the welcome and the information and just the overall welcoming environment. Thank you for everyone for being here this morning. It's just very, I would say, fortunate that we got the opportunity to wake up this morning because a lot of people did not get that opportunity. So I always like to show appreciation for that. And I'm very appreciative of my lived experiences. My lived experiences have a lot of exposure, and I'm finding out that exposure is a key element of education. There are a lot of people who have been told a lot of information, but sometimes life is the best teacher. How many of y'all can relate to that?
Mm-hmm.
A lot of things you learn from someone else, but some of the things that stuck with you the most, life, entered in your lived experience and taught you some things that no other human being can really explain to you. Now you just know it became a part of you, right? And so now I'd like to just share not only the title of the short conversation we're going to have today and the follow-up conversation after the service, but I'm going to give you the intent behind it. The title was, how does status affect our soul? All right. Now, I'm going to ask a question. How many people have a pretty formal idea of what status is? Raise your hand if you don't mind. What status is, okay? And not trying to insult intelligence. How many of us understand what our soul is? Please raise your hand. You know what the soul is, right? And the reason why I do that in education, one thing I find out is never assume that people know what you're talking about. Right? So it's not an insult, it's deliberately me making sure I'm humble enough to address who I'm addressing. Does that make sense? So I want to give you the intent behind it. My lived experience, I've seen a lot of people have their humanity, I would say, influenced by the status even of either they participated in or the status that was placed on to them without their knowledge. Does that make any sense? All right, and so just in my background, as Tanya was talking about, I have a background in education. Ironically, I did not choose education. Education chose me. As a young person, I found myself in situations where I was a mediator between either two people, two organizations, or just two teams who were not getting along. And for some strange reason, I was given the purpose, the skill, and the talent of finding out what both sides were saying. And most of the times that I saw, what was the key element of argumentation was that both sides were saying the same thing. They were just trying to take power over the next person. It was not about who was telling the truth. It was who can be victorious and who was going to be defeated at the end of the day. How many of y'all ever heard an argument and you noticed that both people were saying the same thing, but they were just trying to yell at each other? Have y'all ever seen that before? And so sometimes our ability to be the best human we can be adjusted by a need for power or status. Sometimes when we need status, we end up closing our ears and closing our minds, and the worst part, closing our hearts, just so we can be the winner. And as we know, that a lot of conflict, that if we don't understand exactly what it is, can end up in warfare, and conflict and warfare always determines a winner and a what? Loser. That's what status can do for people who are trying to understand this thing called life in the same living environment. Does that make any sense to anyone? And so I witnessed a lot of arguments growing up. Did not understand where they were coming from, but I did understand that we're not going anywhere anytime soon. So I was fortunate enough to grow up in a situation where the environment presented a problem. And most problems, what a lot of people don't understand and what I've observed in my life, and I don't ask people to agree with me, but I've noticed that problems can expose a purpose. I've noticed it. Sometimes a problem will give you an idea. A problem will give you a service. service opportunity. And most of us find our service to be very enlightening because we are solving a problem that we see. How many of y'all can relate? You get a lot more purpose in making sure you're solving problems and making a lot of progress in your living environment and the environment of other people, right? So I had to really start looking at problems as an opportunity for greatness instead of just a barrier that I can't overcome. Does that make any sense to anyone? So when I looked at status, I looked at it as it was something that was a little bit permanent because I find out that anytime when there's competition, there's going to be a winner and a loser. And I'm finding out that status means a lot to all of us because status can affect our lived experience. And to my knowledge, I don't think anyone purposefully wants a harder life. And I don't want to assume that, but I'm kind of secure in that if people just don't say, I want a really gruesome, hard, unfair life, right? So I find out that status can be a priority, especially if we have witnessed other people struggle, become targeted, become abused, and be victims of even murder and genocide, right? Because of the status that was placed on them. How many of you all are familiar with labels? Labels, right? And a lot of us have been labeled, and some of us have been taught to label other people, right? And one thing I always tell my students, I teach a diversity class at Georgia Southern University, and one of the things that I tell my students all the time is that a good heart is not good enough. A good heart is not good enough. It is mandatory, but it's not the only element of being the best human you can be. Sometimes having a good heart gives us an excuse not to have better skills and to be accurate. Does that make sense? Some of us have had our spirits attacked, our souls damaged, and our feelings hurt with people with a smile. How many of y'all had someone with a smile tell you some of the most horrendous things and patted you on the back and said you were supposed to enjoy it, right? So I always tell my students, especially the students who are trying to go into the education field, when we're dealing with children who have status placed on them that they may not even know, right? I'll give you an example. How many of y'all have ever heard of the statement, children are to be seen and not
heard?
Children are to be seen and not heard. So if you've ever heard of it, I've seen some people finish that statement, so that means you're very aware of that statement, right? Some of y'all grew up in a household environment where they acted out quite consistently, right? You talk out of turn, something unfavorable probably took place, right? Now, I'm going to ask you a question, and please be frank, be honest, be clear. What does that suggest to children if you're supposed to be seen and not heard? They're supposed to be seen and not heard. What does that suggest to a child? What do y'all think?
They're not valuable.
Not valuable. What else?
Nothing to contribute.
Nothing to contribute. What else? I'm sorry?
Powerless.
Powerless. How about this? A lot of people don't verbalize it in this way, but one thing I have noticed working around children is that children are really good at drawing. Have y'all ever noticed that? Kids learn how to draw even before they speak clearly, before they can read, they know how to draw, right? They can look at images, and a lot of people don't understand how powerful images are. But I will give you a statement that you're very familiar with. A picture is worth 1,000 what?
Words.
So before they even get to speak, they know how to communicate 1,000 words. You know how powerful that is? So now, what picture do you think is painting if a child has been told that they're supposed to be seen and heard? What kind of conclusions do you think they can draw? Honestly, no right or wrong answer. I just want to hear how you think. They're an inconvenience. What else? Let's be transparent here. Let's get right to the bottom of it. They do not need it.
We don't care what they think.
Yeah, we don't care what they think, that they actually don't even matter. And I will tell you what I've observed. This is not my opinion, but I have observed that a lot of children have looked at their lived experience Like being invited to a party, and when you show up, people act like you're trespassing. Being invited to a party, and when you show up, people look at you like you're trespassing. Now, has anybody ever been invited to a potluck or a Christmas party or anything? Have y'all ever been invited? Personal invitation, text message, something in the mail, invited to a wedding, right? And if you show up and people looking at you like you were trespassing on their property, how would you feel?
Unwelcome.
Unwelcome, right? Well, not only that, when you show up and you feel like you're not invited, you're looking at the word of the people who invite you like it's not consistent. Y'all understand what I'm saying? And what a lot of people may not understand is that status can blind us, and certain status comes with different privileges. Can we at least be honest about that, right? We work in our businesses, schools, different corporate American spaces, or just any organization, right? The higher the status, the bigger the responsibility. However, you have a lot more privilege too. You have a little bit more power, right? And I want you all to understand, this is not a definition of status, but it comes along with status. You have to talk about power. And one thing a lot of us want is power. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. However, what I've observed is that a lot of people don't comprehend. We don't know how it is used, and we don't know how some of us have used it to take the power away from other people. Does that make sense? So, what does status do to our soul? I'll give you an example. How many of y'all have ever been around an educational environment and someone told you that that was a bad kid?
Mhm.
All right, I'll give you a clear example of what that can do to our soul. When we are introduced to someone without their presence, we're usually in the presence of their status and not their demeanor. Does that make any sense? So if I'm introduced, and I always like seeing this, not liking the situation, but I like observing this so I can protect children. When I'm meeting about a child, I'm giving a description of their status without their presence. That's textbook being seen and not. And for me as a human being and trying to maximize my humanity in the process of not taking away from other people, I'm trying to make sure I stay cognizant of and responsible for the power that I have as an adult. Adult is a status, not just a status that comes along with it. There is power that comes with having the status of an adult. And when you have a child, and a lot of us, just the culture of it, not necessarily the choice, but the culture of children being seen and not, guess what can happen to my behavior if I don't know how to check it? What can that status do to my soul? That status can convince me to ignore my own soul. I've seen it on several occasions with people with power who don't understand what power is. And this is not judgment. This is strictly observation. Because you want to know why? I've actually done it. And I was a good person. That's the reason why I always tell people, good is not good enough. You want to know why? Good is also a status. How many people have had horrific behavior and said back, oh, I didn't mean it, I'm a person. I'm a what person? Good person. And see, status can justify bad behavior if you don't even understand how it works. So, and this, well, you don't want to be called good. It's not necessarily I don't want to be called good, but I want to be very, very responsible and mature about the work that I'm doing, not the position that I have. Y'all understand what I'm saying? The position can sometimes hide the purpose. And I want the purpose and the productivity to shine more than the position that I have. Yes, I'm an adult. Yes, I'm an educator. Yes, I work at a university. Yes, I'm a public speaker, professional speaker. Yes, I do that. However, if what I'm doing is not benefiting the people I'm in front of, I'm wasting your time. And my status is not a good enough excuse to waste anyone's time. Can y'all agree? Have y'all ever been somewhere where someone is decorated, but they wasted your time? Okay. Yes, they have done a lot of great work. They have a lot of good accolades. They drove in a nice car. This person just wasted my time. Now check this out. Which one is more valuable? Money or time? What do y'all think? Time. No one's sitting around printing off time, are they? There's a lot of people with a lot of money who don't have any more what? Time. So I will tell you this, the reason why don't understand. And the challenge that I have to a lot of people is not look at it as what am I doing wrong? I'm asking you to just look at what have you been told. Does that make sense? And one of the things in my classroom is guilt is also something that our ego produces. Guilt is something also that our ego produces. It's something about me. I'm a good person. I didn't mean it. So all of a sudden I start using guilt instead of using my skills to do better. Does that make sense? Guilt also makes us want to have a good status, not necessarily the good work. Does that make sense? That's the reason why I always tell people when we talk about race, religion, class, gender identity, warfare, genocide, a lot of people self-identify with the status of the people we're talking about instead of the work they actually did. And their guilt can get in the way of the exposure to knowledge. Some people can block the information because it hurts so much because you identify with something you don't understand. And I try to tell people a lot that people who don't understand status can use it without them knowing exactly what they're doing. I'll give you an example. Have y'all ever saw someone who tried to parallel park in a busy city, downtown somewhere, right? Anybody been to a major city before and you've seen someone try to parallel park? Now notice this. And one thing I do is talk about privilege, not in a finger pointing sense, but I need y'all to understand that everyone has some element of privilege somewhere, even if we don't see it. And when we're trying to parallel park, especially in a busy city, we may be in the driver's seat, but it's a lot of stuff we can't see. Is that correct? Now, it's amazing how you can have the privilege of being the driver and the power of being the driver, but you need someone who is not in that driver's seat in order to make sure you don't cause accidents. That makes sense? So what I'm finding out is that status comes with blind spots. No matter who we are, no matter where we're from, status comes with blind spots. And a lot of people think privilege and status are the same thing. They're not necessarily the same thing. Sometimes you can have status and not understand the privilege because you've never seen it. Y'all understand what I'm saying? Just because you've never seen the privilege doesn't mean you don't have the status. And I want us to at least think about what I'm talking about, because even me talking about status and privilege and power, it is still confusing. But I want everyone to understand that as soon as you question something, that is the beginning of knowledge. We have repeated a lot of different labels that we have never questioned before. We're repeating them because they've been given to us, and they've been given to us in a way that we were supposed to be seen and we were supposed to memorize this stuff without questioning authority. Now, has anyone ever been told not to question authority? Has anybody ever been told that before? All right. Now, this is the funny thing about authority. Authority has a status, and status means power, right? So if you can't question something, that's status right there. And if you can't question something, your learning process stops, or at least it's paused. Is that correct? And so our human experience is laced with learning experiences. And anytime when you're in a place where you can't ask questions, your humanity is being compromised. Regardless of what we feel about it or not, I'm talking about the result, not the intent. A lot of the people that have done that or put us in that environment, they had good intentions, do they not? But look at the result. The result is I can't even talk to the people I depend on. Think about how many kids do not see a way that they can talk to their own parents. So they go to everyone else except the people who are responsible for their safety to talk about the things that are going on in life. Anybody can relate? How many people found it difficult to actually communicate with the people who had their best interests at heart? So now, being seen and not heard, I want y'all to start questioning How deep has that gone? Is it still present in my family? Is it still present in my workspace? Because I promise you this, that statement, that idea, is in more environments than you ever can imagine. How am I doing on time? Cool, all right. I told Tanya earlier, I'm really good with the hook, just hook me, I'm okay, I do not get offended if they wrap it up, all right? Because I just told y'all earlier, I don't like wasting time. We can't print it off, so I need to make sure that I'm giving you exactly what I can give you and sit down, right? But I do want you all to understand that the labels that we were given and our language that we're using, and I'm talking about the English language, the language that we have been given about groups that we don't specifically know, they're laced with labels. Okay? They're laced with labels, and I think all of us have been given labels about another group. Is that safe to say? Okay? Now, this is what I want everyone to understand. Every label comes with a status. Every label comes with a status. Our job as human beings are trying to be better human beings is find out what status is on that label. Because some of us just think the label is there and it's used to describe or identify specific groups. But this is what I want you all to understand too. How many labels exist that have been placed on the group and none of the labels have the group's point of view? How many of us have been placing labels on groups without their permission? And I want y'all to understand something. Permission is the proper transfer of power. When we label people, we take away the power. Y'all understand how status goes? And our status, and that's what a lot of people may not understand as well. Status grants some of us the privilege of labeling people without being questioned. That's how we end up being the authority of other people's lived experiences and their description across the planet. Okay? I always tell people, no matter what your status or your racial identity or racial label that you have been introduced to and you've never questioned, you want to ask yourself, where did it come from? And do you even understand what it is? One of the things, like I told you before, when I first realized when I was a young person that I could find out where people were at odds with each other or they were arguing with each other, right? I found out there was an element of fear associated with argument. Sometimes people are scared of losing ground. They don't want to lose the footing, the power, whatever. They don't want to lose, right? And one of the things I found out is that permission being the proper transfer of power, a lot of us engage without permission. I'm noticing that. I'm observing that. And this is what I mean. When we go to another group and we've been told something about that group, instead of saying what you know, ask them to educate you first before we engage. That's something that I'm doing right now with children that I didn't understand I was supposed to do a long time ago. When I first go to a school system, I'm given a lot of information about students that are not in the room. And unfortunately, what I've done in the past and I'm working on now is making sure that if I get that information, do not take it to the group who could not represent themselves. What I have to do is acknowledge it, acknowledge the information, try to comprehend it as much as possible. And the group that I'm assigned to, I sit down and ask them to educate me on their position on this planet. It has done wonders for me. Done wonders. Why? Because I'm more accurate. My good heart and my status has been taken away from the work and the service that I'm there to do. And it's not enough to be a consultant or a doctor if you're not helping anyone. I want everybody to understand that. It's not enough to have a title and you don't understand your task. It's not enough to have status and you don't even know how to serve. It's not enough to have a position and you don't produce. I think that's right. I don't want to hold you all too long, but I do want you all to look at the status of good and bad. How much are those labels used to describe different environments, schools, and people, even jobs? Anytime when we use good and bad to describe something, that is a status we put on that, and it can affect our behavior, which comes directly from our soul. My name is Dr. Marion Christopher Pugh. I really appreciate the opportunity to come and speak with you all today.